been a lot of stuff being made about the fact that Labour, of course, are ahead of the Tories right now. Does this matter?
No, it's meaningless because there's still potentially 2 years to go until a general election. And look, I remember times, for example, Michael Foot in the early 80s was miles in front of Margaret Thatcher in the opinion polls, but Thatcher smashed Michael Foot and the Labour Party in 1983 when it mattered at the general election. You can look at the years 87 to 92 when Neil Kinnock was the leader of the Labour Party, had consistent and in some cases quite substantial poll leads against first Margaret Thatcher and then John Major when he took over in 1990. And everybody thought on the basis of that Kinnock was going to be the Prime Minister in 92 and lost the election. And he said himself, actually, Neil Kinnock, that elections are won in years, not weeks or months. And I think that's really true. And it strikes me, Michelle, that and look, I don't rule out the possibility Labour is going to win the next election. I think the Tories have had such a bad few months. I mean, the infighting and the meltdown and the cataclysmic management of the economy could really do for them, frankly. But if Labour wins it, I suspect it will be something like the recent Australian election where the Labour Party won, but they didn't really inspire anyone. They were seen as the best of a bad bunch, really. So if Labour does win, and I don't think there's any guarantee that they will, it could be for those reasons.
Where do you stand on it, Henry?
I mean, the polls matter only in as much as they colour the debate, right? Politicians, how they behave, what they think they're doing, the narratives that journalists tell are informed by the polls. So to that extent, it can have an effect. But I agree with Paul, it's far too far out. And also, frankly, Rishi Sunak has not delivered his austerity budget yet. It's all very well, you know, he's not Liz Truss, and I think there is a bounce in not being Liz Truss, who was almost uniquely bad at politics at the highest level. But on the 17th, he and Jeremy Hunt are going to stand up and list 50-odd billion pounds worth of tax rises and cuts to public services. And whether or not this bounce survives that announcement is the real test of whether there is actually a fight back going on or whether it's simply the calm before the storm for the Conservatives.
Yeah, and Paul, I read an article that you've written actually quite recently about the Labour Party, and one of the reasons that you were saying that you feel it might perhaps struggle is because of what you call identity politics. What are you talking about?
Well, I think the Labour Party's too woke. I think it's too middle class. I'm not suggesting middle class people shouldn't be involved with the Labour Party, but it's become over the last couple of decades so top heavy with middle class people. It represents Hampstead more than it represented Hartlepool. Well, more than it does represent Hartlepool. So that kind of coalition, which always held the Labour Party together, the working class and a layer of middle class sort of white-collar people, has become completely unbalanced. And, yeah, it's just been immersed, really, in this creed of identity politics, which has got this kind of obsessive focus on people's individual characteristics, their racial characteristics, for example. And just tries to, and for me, it's the complete antithesis of what the Labour Party was created to do, which was to foster the maximum unity among working people, but now seems intent on saying, actually, you're this type of working class person, you're that type of working class person, and creating this sort of atmosphere of separateness and division between people.
What's motivating this, right? Because I listen to people when, you know, I listen to what I would call the height of stupidity, really, when you're asked a question, can a woman have a penis? Now, I imagine that approximately 5-year-olds would answer that question, no, they cannot. And then I hear people like Keir Starmer going around the houses, getting awkward, getting uncomfortable, fudging it. What is driving that? Because what I call normal people, like most people, would just sit there and think the answer to that is obviously no. So why would...
Because the people who populate the Labour Party largely now are people who kind of live and exist in their enclaves. You know, I know North London has been used a lot recently, but there is certainly some truth in that. The Labour Party is a very London-centric party. It's a party for our fashionable cities and our university towns. And the party has lost touch and been hollowed out in many respects of representation from what I would call small-town Britain, blue-collar Britain, provincial Britain, working-class Britain, where people do speak normal language, where people do look at questions like, you know, can a woman have a penis, and think, what on earth are you talking about? That's crazy. But I think because the Labour Party is existing more and more in this echo chamber, the people who run it and who are its main activists think that actually most of Britain understands this and speaks like this. And until they break out of that bubble, they won't understand that actually large parts of Britain look at some of this agenda and think it's completely nuts.